Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be discussing a topic I had covered on a blog post in January 2017, which is why I've called on the NA New Adult Marketing category. If you don't know, to make a long story short, for a while there, like maybe 10 or so years back, New Adult was considered a really hot new, not a genre, but an age-based marketing category for roughly ages 18 to 25, some extended even as high as 30, maybe even a little bit before that. And it had seemed like it had a lot of promise and lots of genres represented within it, and the new adult community was very active. But now it's basically fizzled to just like romance, like sort of like YA romance with older characters and like sexier sex scenes. So let's get on with it. So since I've been in the writing blogosphere since 2011, I entered this community. I'm not really so active in it anymore since I decided to go indie, and unfortunately there's just a lot of toxicity in the like traditional publishing and people aspiring to traditional publishing and social media. That's a unfortunate topic for another post, but I am still somewhat active and aware of the goings on in this community. And when in the past I had met a number of new adult writers, and I regularly participated in a seemingly discontinued, now I believe it definitely is discontinued, a weekly Twitter chat for new adult writers and readers. And I regularly visited and commented at the now inactive New Adult Alley blog, and I also did a group presentation about New Adult in my YA Lit class, so this was definitely something I supported. Now, I know I'm far from the only person who's cooled on the idea of NA as a category as much as I once believed in its great potential. Some of these reasons include: one, NA Alley, the blog and the Twitter by association like account, has changed its handle to Next Lit, in addition to discontinuing their weekly chat and no longer blogging. So that basically said that all the people who were at the forefront of leading the charge to get this recognized as a next big thing and to make libraries and bookstores add new adult sections, even they don't seem to really believe in it anymore, or they've kind of moved on. Number two, with some notable exceptions, and in spite of the somewhat greater diversity of genres a few years ago, maybe I think this is probably more like 10 years ago by now, NA is dominated by contemporary romances. Well, there's nothing wrong with that genre. That's not how you successfully pitch a new marketing category to the wider public. You want to have lots of genres within it, not just make people think, oh, this is like shallow and fluffy or the same thing over and over again. You want them to believe in it and like go to the bat so they can do more, like agents taking it on and editors who like it and bookstores and libraries who believe in it, not just like some small like niche group. Because basically now NA, because it is mostly contemporary romances, it's only in self-publishing and indie publication with smaller publishing houses. Traditional publishing doesn't really seem to want to have anything much to do with it anymore. Number three, related to number two, many new adult books read like YA with slightly older characters and sex scenes, again coming back to that idea that most of it has just become like contemporary romance instead of like thoughtful, substantial. I mean, obviously, of course, the genre of romance has come a long way in the last few decades. I would never disparage it, but basically, new adult is mostly contemporary romance, and these books do tend to feel a bit cookie cutter, so that's definitely not the best of what the romance genre is capable of. I know that because I do like follow and read a number of romance writer blogs. The genre has come like a huge way in the last few decades, and maybe people who like wrote it off in the past should give it another chance, maybe if they're interested. But the NA books I have seen, they don't really seem to represent the great potential of what romance can be when it's like written really well. Number four, where's the actual adult coming of age experience NA was supposed to represent? Going to university, graduating, finding a first apartment, getting a first job, navigating a first serious relationship. That's not the entire focus of the book. I mean, again, it's just romance over and over again. How is that going to make people want to believe in it and go to the bat for it? Number five, many writers who once proudly waved the NA banner have stopped querying or classifying their books as NA. They're now simply adult literature. Sometimes they age the characters down to make it YA, or they just quietly like say it's a regular adult book and don't mention NA at all. Number six, while I'm much more enthusiastic about the indie movement, both small publishing houses and self-publishing, than traditional publishing these days for many reasons too long to get into here, many agents and editors have said they no longer consider NA or it'd make writers age the characters up or down. So if you're considering traditional publication seriously, or even like hybrid publication in addition to like self or indie publishing, also doing like a big name big five house for traditional publishing, that's something you really want to keep in mind if that's the age of your characters and you really believe in that story as it is. Number 7, not enough representation of other kinds of early adult experiences. Where are the stories of going right from high school to the working world, or the military instead of university? How about getting married and starting families instead of taking part in the hookup culture? The entire world isn't bourgeois. I mean, I know a lot of Americans in particular don't really have any class consciousness these days, if they ever did, and they basically seem to think, oh, everyone is like middle class, and then there are a couple of really rich people. They don't know or understand anything about how the working class and the poor work. It's like much different than like the like comfortable like class privileged bourgeois background where you like you take for granted you go to college, you get a wonderful career soon afterwards, you get a lovely McMansion in suburbia, you have like perfect children who go to like a private nice like charter school or just like a private academy or something like that. Working class experience is much different than the bourgeois experience, and I wish that would be reflected in more literature. And we did like it routinely until like maybe 10 or so years ago. The working class was very well represented and respectfully represented on television, but unfortunately it's just not that way anymore. And again, this is a topic for another post, but I am very class conscious myself because I did grow up quite working class. It took a long time for my parents to even join the ranks of the lower middle class, so that's something I'm very keenly aware of when I look at the world and read books and watch films and TV. But anyway, number 8, NA doesn't seem to work with certain genres. While this may contradict number 2, an adult character's age doesn't really matter in a genre like sci-fi, fantasy, or mystery. What does it matter if the protagonist of a high epic fantasy is 21, 26, or 32? It's basically a fantasy story. The age is totally irrelevant to what's going on in that genre. Number 9. Do we really need yet another excuse to prolong adolescence? As compared to 50 plus years ago, the average 20-something of today isn't in a long-term job, married, or a parent. It's more common to go clubbing and bar hopping every weekend, hook up instead of seriously dating, and work crappy jobs. And obviously that's not really most people's fault. I mean, I believe most people would prefer to like have a wonderful career soon after they graduate college and maybe settle down like soon instead of later. But unfortunately the general culture and society has just changed so much, and as well as it's more difficult to find a good job for many reasons too long to get into here, but that's just not really represented in NA, and it's also not very typical for the average person of that age nowadays. They just don't do what people like our parents and grandparents did. It's just a completely alien, a completely different society now than it was in those days, for better or worse. Number 10, related to number 9 and number 8, historical doesn't really seem like the best NA genre. While we shouldn't aspire to only read about characters who are similar to us or exactly like us, it also might be harder for modern-day 20-somethings to relate to characters living as and being treated like full adults instead of overgrown teens, and I discuss this more in a future post. And because like basically, as I've mentioned, it wasn't like super like rare, or neither was it uncommon or common for people to get married at somewhat younger ages in the past, and they weren't considered, oh, you must come from a broken home, or you're like desperate to get away from something, or you're just like insta love, little kids playing it grown up and you'll divorce soon. People just understood, so many couples wanted to get married in their like very late teens, early 20s, instead of just like indefinitely dating for 5-10 years, like moving in together without discussing marriage and having like 2-3 kids out of wedlock. It was just, again, a completely different experience, and like teenagers did have much more adult, like serious, heavy responsibilities in the past, and people didn't treat them like overgrown babies. They were just like somewhat younger adults who weren't being coddled throughout life like many modern teens unfortunately are. Number 11. This delays readers from graduating to full adult literature already. Once upon a time, there were no stepping stones. You just started reading books from the grown-up section of the library and bookstore. I started reading Hermann Hesse at 14 and began reading a lot of the great Russian literature at age 16. I never thought I had to only read about people my own age, and I do realize maybe I'm a bit unusual because I always read like 3, 4 grade levels up, and I was like reading adult literature full time, and there wasn't really too much like YA literature as we know it today. When I was a teenager myself in the 1990s, and I probably wouldn't have been interested in that anyway because I did never had the like cliche like teenager experience. I had absolutely zero interested in like dating and partying and sneaking out of the house and all sorts of stuff like that. I'm like too moral and boring for my own good. I'm like a very serious person, and I'm also very religious, although obviously I'm not like officially Orthodox myself. All my ear piercings kind of make me not like look like a typical Orthodox woman, but there are certain things that people, teenagers, do that I was never interested in, and that was often reflected in young adult books, and therefore why would I want to read about like things I wasn't interested in? But anyway, a lot of like adults don't understand there's lots of like gray area in a spectrum in adult literature. They think, oh, it's all like heavy, serious, long stuff like Don Quixote and War and Peace, and like I don't have the time or the attention to read like some book like that. I just want something fun that's 200 pages with like a simple, shallow plot. I mean, like basically they need to understand there's lots of different adult literature out there. It's not just heavy, serious classics. Number 12. There's enough of a problem with people over 30 exclusively or almost exclusively reading YA. I have absolutely no issue with adults reading YA or middle grade, because obviously if you write in that age category, you want to be aware of what's out there, and maybe you have a blog or a vlog that does a lot of reviews of that. You want to obviously know about that so you can keep doing fresh reviews all the time. But if you're just reading that like exclusively or almost exclusively, it feels like you're kind of stunted. Like, why do you relate and more to and like teenagers and actual adults in their 30s and above? Like, what's wrong with you? Why do you like that instead of things intended for people your own age? And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be heavy, long, like classic old books. It can be just fairly recent books, which are somewhat shorter in length, like fun to read, not very dense, lightweight. But again, you just have to look at what's out there instead of just feeling, oh, I liked YA when I was young and I never graduated from it, so I guess I've just got to keep reading it, and adult literature is all boring. I just wish people would have more open minds and realize it's not healthy to only read books about teenagers when they should be reading about adults too, and more than teenagers as well. Now I'm increasingly off put by this trend of adults who will not read books about other adults. Like they're proud when they say, oh, I only read YA. I don't like adult books and I'll never read them. And I address this more in a future post. I'll address this again here too. Number 13. I dislike age-based categories in general. While I agree general labels exist for a reason, there are often nuances within them. The definitions have also shifted drastically over time. Many books written for children in the 19th and early 20th century are now shelved as adult classics, while many books classified as young adult in my day are now shelved as middle grade. How do you pigeonhole a book which ages the characters over 5 years? Like, for example, the classic Bildungsroman, when a character would start as a child or a preteen and be somewhere in the teens or maybe even adult by the end. That like takes them through several age-based categories. Like, for example, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn or Anne of Green Gables. How do you really classify that? You can't, because it's just a coming of age story. It's not meant to be just for one category, like, oh, only teens or preteens or adults should read this. I mean, that's just unfortunately a lot of literature and books these days are like much more rigid than they used to be about age-based categories. Number 14. It's kind of patronizing to call the people who are ages 18 through about 25 or even up to 30 new adults instead of simply adults, period. It's like helicopter parenting and loco parentis, and obviously I'm really embarrassed when I see how many adults who really aren't that much younger than I am, how they behave on social media, like the blue tick pronoun people on Twitter. They have like giant meltdowns when like someone disagrees with them. They're like babies having a tantrum, and they're like really angry and like hostile, and even like sending death threats to people they don't like or who disagreed with them instead of behaving like normal adults. And that's just like an unfortunate side effect of coddling these people for so long and not pushing them into adult life. They're just like treated like, children or teenagers forever, and they don't not used to hearing the word no or being expected to take on, more adult responsibilities. But that's obviously a much more complicated topic for another post. Number 15. Many new adult books have become repetitive, indistinguishable, cookie cutter, and that's not something you want in any genre or age-based category. New adult really did have awesome potential, and I'm sorry to see what has happened to it, because it really was, like seemed like a really like wonderful new next big thing in literature, and a lot of people involved in it were really excited about it. There certainly is a market for books about characters in that age range, but I no longer feel that needs a new separate category. Just write about adults who happen to be a little bit younger. Don't just call it like a special age-based category just because they're in a certain age bracket. So thank you for watching my video. I will be doing my next video on Wednesday. I plan to review Carney's House Party, which is one of the two books in this. It's part of the Deep Valley spin-off series of sorts of the Betsy Tacy series. It's my favorite book written that I've read so far by Maud Hart Lovelace. So tune in then. Thank you very much. Bye.